So this is our first topic, humans and microbes, and this is an old comic that was in one of the older editions of this textbook, and I love it because I find that it's a really good intro, right? He says, "Sometimes I wish I'd gone into microbiology," micro emphasized with an underline, because clearly he's not dealing with microscopic organisms here, is he? Right? He probably went into what other ology, which means the study of zoology, right? Based on the critters all around him. He feels a little overwhelmed. And this course can feel a little overwhelming as well sometimes, right? There's a lot of material. Go over it often, right? And if you're having difficulties, if something's just not clicking for you, right? Like I said, if you study, you do that Connect assignment, and you do poorly on it, right? Then your study methods are probably not appropriate. You're in a 200 level course. At this point, you should know what works for you. You know, students that write out flashcards, right? Continue writing them out. If that worked for you, that's your method, right? If you have to talk it over with somebody else, talk it over with someone else, right? Do what works for you. Continue that. If what you've been doing hasn't been working, then change it up, right? And come see me. I've been, doing this for a very long time. I know lots of different ways of helping you out. And I have lots of different books in my office, so if our book isn't making sense to you on a particular topic, we can pull out another one and read up on it and see if that clicks a little bit better for you. Okay? So, always remember that. Although this may seem like a lot, right? Just do it in little chunks, and it won't seem so bad. So first of all, right, this is microbiology, so having a working definition of that, what that means, and what it entails, right? What's the scope? Even though we talk about micro and being microscopic, subject matter-wise, it includes lots of things, right? Lots of things fall under that definition of microbiology. So we'll look at some major examples of that. So first of all, micro means what? Small. Biology is the study of life, right? And even in microbiology, we tend to study some things that actually aren't, some scientists don't believe to be living, right? But it falls under that portion of being small, right? Of being microscopic, that you need a microscope to see it. So, can anybody think of anything that falls under microbiology, like some topics that you may have even seen in the syllabus or in your book as you were flipping through it? So what's another ology that would actually kind of fall under sometimes microbiology that we would talk about it in this class? Pathology or pathogens, right? What do you think of when you think of microscopic organisms? What types of organisms do you think of? Bacteria, right? So bacteriology, right? What else? Tiny. Could make you sick. Viruses, right? So study virology, right? So bacteriology, as we said, right, is a subdiscipline of microbiology, right? And it focuses just on bacteria. Virology, of course, focuses just on viruses. If any of you guys had Marion Freidstadt for biology, any of you guys have her for biology class? She's a virologist. That's her background. She actually got to study poliovirus this summer. She went to either Dallas or Houston and was working in a research lab. So if you like viruses, she's the cool lady to talk to. I like viruses, just not my area of specialty. Mycology. Now those of you guys in A&P might think of what? When I say muscles, but not the case here, right? Because this is microbiology, so it's got to be something microscopic. Anybody know? This is fungus, right? So yeast, molds, those kinds of things. And then parasitology, what do you think of when we say parasites? Mice? Lice, yes. Mostly worms, right? Pinworms, tapeworms. Yep, amoeba. Some of the protozoa and stuff that we study would fall under parasitology as well. Excellent. Food microbiology, right? We love that, don't we? Right? There are some foods that we eat that are actually the product of using microorganisms to convert that food product into another product, right, that we can ingest as well. And we'll talk about those in a moment. Environmental microbiology, right? Becoming more and more popular field of study. How microbes affect our environment, how they benefit our environment, what roles they play. And quite substantial roles. We're going to talk about some of the really important components. And then, of course, good old forensic microbiology, right? Using microbiology to solve what? Crimes. Yeah, right. Cases, to understand what happened, right? Right even down to a microbial level, give us some clue as to maybe even where the crime had taken place. So a lot of you, how many of you guys are nursing majors? I've been loving reading, yeah, pretty much all of you. Let me put it this way. How many of you guys are not a nursing major? A couple. Okay, like 3. What's your major? Okay, great. So it's in allied health. Funeral services. Funeral services. They don't have you guys taking 210? They changed it to 211 for your curriculum? Okay, just making sure. So most of you guys dealing with health, and especially you guys in funeral services, if you haven't read this book yet, add it to your to-do list. It's called STIFF, S-T-I-F-F, by Mary Roach. You just found it. It is an excellent book. It talks about all the different types of research that are done on dead bodies, and believe it or not, I was on spring break and standing in line to see the Constitution reading that book, and I was laughing out loud. And people looked at me and they're like, "What are you reading?" And I was like, I don't know if you want to know. And she does a really good job of putting humor where it's appropriate, right, on a touchy subject such as that. But it's definitely, anyone going into the allied health field, it's always one I suggest that you read. It's not a very long one. It's like maybe 200 pages. And really interesting perspective on things. And as I said, more and more nowadays we're using down to the microscopic level. You know, we're not just talking about DNA and hair samples, but also what microbes are present, right? And helping us trace and understand what may have happened. So pretty amazing stuff. So microbiology, the way we know it today, wouldn't exist if it wasn't for inquisitive individuals like Anthony von Leeuwenhoek. I put the date there just to give you guys an idea of how long ago this was, not because this is a history class, right, which it's not, right? So we're not memorizing dates. But when I look at that date, I almost can't even fathom it, right, how long ago that was, of what life might have been like for him. So he was actually a drapery merchant, right? He dealt with fabrics, and so he was interested in the quality of his fabrics, and he wanted to see them in greater detail, and he made his own lenses, right? Ground down his own glass, made his own lenses to try and observe these things. But he didn't stop there, right? He looked at just about anything he could look at, including his own feces, right? He was the first person to identify a protozoan known as Giardia, he was probably looking at his own poop when he saw that. He looked a lot at water, of course, and we now know nowadays there are lots of microorganisms that exist in natural water supplies. And so he termed these animalcules, animal referring to the fact that they were moving around, right? They were clearly living, animal-like. Cules referring to the fact that they were small, right? So like molecules are small, right? It was referring to the small component. So we know that he did this because he actually wrote letters to the Royal Society in London. We have some of this documentation even from back then. And I recently was doing some reading in one of the textbooks, and turns out the drawings like that you see, that he did, he didn't actually do them. He hired an artist to draw them. And you see how rudimentary these drawings are? I'm like, really, dude? You had to hire someone else to do this for you? But interesting as it is, right? And so obviously other individuals that came after him expanded upon this, right? We have very high-powered microscopes nowadays where you can go down to the atomic level, right? We can see individual atoms of molecules and how they're arranged using atomic force. So pretty amazing stuff. So microbes have an enormous impact on our lives and human existence in general. Unfortunately, and in this class, we focus on the bad stuff, right? Their ability to kill people. And in fact, they've killed more of us than we've killed of each other, even though we've done quite a bit of that as well. Without certain microbes, though, life on Earth would not exist. Microorganisms are responsible for the overproduction of oxygen. The photosynthetic organisms, microscopic organisms, the algae that live in our oceans, are the ones that overproduce enough oxygen that make it possible for us to breathe oxygen. Plants produce oxygen through photosynthesis, but they also consume it. So they don't produce enough excess for our existence and others like us that need oxygen. Nitrogen is a gas found in our atmosphere, but it cannot be utilized by most organisms in that form. It is microscopic organisms in the soil that convert that into usable forms that can be utilized by plants that then can be consumed by animals, right? And the cycle of life continues. Microorganisms are major decomposers, right? That when something dies, how does it go back into the cycle of life? Microorganisms, right? They are going to break down that material, turn it back into soil, right? That can then be made back into plants, right? To feed animals, and the cycle continues. Food, right? Fermentation is a process, right, where a particular food is used as an energy source by a microorganism. When it does that in this particular process, it produces byproducts. The most common are gases, alcohols, and acids. And this is why most fermented foods tend to be sour tasting, because acids are actually quite sour. So milk is a very common product that's commonly fermented by microorganisms and produces products that we're aware of things like yogurt, cheese, buttermilk. But we ferment other things like berries and we make wine, and grains and we make beer, right? And again, it depends on the situation of what food source and what organism you're using as to what of those, how many of those products they're going to produce and to what level, right? How much gas, how much acid, how much alcohol. Bioremediation, using microorganisms to degrade environmental waste, right? So things that can be harmful. Oil spills, right? There's a microorganism out there that pretty much will eat just about anything. There's ones that will even eat gas. Okay? There's ones that will eat oil. And you know, oil is in the environment, right? We take it from the environment. So it only makes sense that there might be an organism out there might be able to use it as an energy source, other than just how we use it for energy. So when we have an oil spill, why don't we just throw a whole bunch of bacteria out there to clean it up? Oil spills, when we have them happen on a grand scale, right? Enormous amounts. Microorganisms are just that. Micro, tiny, right? They're not very big. They can't take care of all our big problems, right? It would take millions upon billions of them. Over time, they would take care of it. The problem is we want everything done now, right? We want our mess cleaned up now. So they can be used to treat radioactive waste, degrade different pesticides that have been used and chemicals that we've produced, like PCBs and DDT. And I hate when we use acronyms because then we forget what they stand for, right? And quite honestly, I can't remember what either one of those stand for, but they're ugly chemicals. And obviously, if I can't remember, I'm not going to ask you on a test or anything like that, right? All right. Bacteria can synthesize things. So we've already mentioned alcohol, right? Good old ethanol, one of our favorite. They can produce pesticides that are more of a natural form, right? They themselves produce these things to help protect them, and so therefore we're basically just stealing their technology when we utilize their chemicals and use them on a larger scale. They produce dietary amino acids. You have microorganisms living in your gut right now and on your skin. These organisms produce in your gut vitamins that are beneficial to you. Most of the things you buy at good old GNC was produced by a microorganism and then just put into pill form for you. If Americans actually ate better diets, you wouldn't actually need to take vitamin supplements, right? If you ate all your fruits and veggies like you're supposed to, then you wouldn't necessarily need to take things like multivitamins and supplements. Because the microorganisms in your environment provide what you need. Antibiotics. So in this list I'm saying bacteria can synthesize numerous products, antibiotics being one of them. That seems kind of weird, right? Because why do we take antibiotics? To kill what? Bacteria typically. But I just told you bacteria make it. Are they fighting amongst themselves? Absolutely. Again, in that case, we're just stealing their technology. So some bacteria produce these chemical substances that harm others. So we basically have taken their technology, right, their ability, and we've again just put it in pill form for us. So that we then can use their technology to fight the organisms that they're fighting against. Okay. When you take it against bacteria, depending on the antibiotic, will depend on what types of organisms it will affect. It doesn't affect necessarily all bacteria. But there are some that we combine and we modify so they are broad spectrum and they affect a lot of different types of bacteria. The problem with that is, do they affect the bacteria in your gut that help you? Yes, right? So that's why lots of antibiotics, misuse of antibiotics can be harmful to your body, right? Because you're killing off the good guys and the bad guys, right? These drugs don't necessarily discriminate against specific bacteria. Unlike your immune system, right? It can target a specific bacteria. Where when you take drugs, they'll harm lots of different bacteria depending on the type of drug you're taking. Right? And then sometimes we have problems with resistance, right? MRSA, or sometimes people pronounce that acronym as MRSA, stands for Myctogen-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. It's a strain of Staphylococcus aureus that is resistant to methicillin, which is a penicillin-like drug that was overused, right, improperly used. So many, and this bacteria, unfortunately, is everywhere. So we can't even limit our exposure to it. And so we've developed this strain because, evolutionary-wise, some of them developed abilities to not be harmed by that antibiotic. So, of course, they become very prominent in the population where we're using this antibiotic. We're basically using this as a selective pressure. Natural selection, right? The survival of the fittest. Well, MRSA is the most fit because antibiotics don't kill it. So we've switched to another commonly used antibiotic called vancomycin. So guess what we have now? VRSA, vancomycin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Eventually, we're going to run out of antibiotics, potentially. Right? And this is why the proper use of them and understanding about them is very important. Now, not all drugs you take are antibiotics. Antibiotic is a specific definition, right? It falls under antimicrobials. Antimicrobial means any substance, right, from anywhere, from a chemist's lab, from a plant, from even maybe another organism other than a microorganism that kills or inhibits microorganisms. That's an antimicrobial. When we say antibiotic, we're specifically talking about a compound that was made by a microorganism that can kill or inhibit another microorganism. So the most common example you're aware of is penicillin. It's actually made by a fungus, penicillium. And again, why is that fungus producing a substance that will kill bacteria? They're fighting, right? What does that fungus have against the bacteria? What are they fighting over? What do we fight over? What's important to us that we fight over? Huh? To life. And what do you need for life to live? Oxygen. They don't really need to fight over oxygen. That's pretty relatively available. Food. Food. Food is number one on the list, right? And space, right? Space where you can exist, space where you can acquire that food. So the same is true for microorganisms. They're fighting for their spot and they're fighting for their food. And they do this at the chemical level. That's what these are, chemicals. So amoxicillin, you've probably heard of lots of other drugs like ampicillin, right, that all end in cillin. These are semi-natural, semi-synthetic. They've taken penicillin and they've chemically modified it into these other drugs. So it's partly natural, partly synthetic. And because they've changed it, it works differently. Each one of the different cillins work differently, affect different bacteria. Right? So antimicrobial includes all antibiotics, so penicillin is listed there, but then other drugs like sulfonamide, sulfur drugs, right? So these are chemical drugs. Augmentin is actually a combination of amoxicillin and another drug that interferes with an enzyme that some bacteria produce that destroys penicillin, like drugs. So the unfortunate thing is sometimes people say antibiotic when it really isn't an antibiotic, right? You're safer to say an antimicrobial. You won't ever get that wrong, right? Because antibiotics fall under that category. So as I said, microorganisms do cause disease. The title of this course is Microbiology, Human Pathogens. So we're really going to focus on the bad guys, the ones that cause disease. But as we mentioned just a moment ago, right, we wouldn't have alcohol, we wouldn't have vitamins, right, we wouldn't have oxygen or usable nitrogen if it wasn't for microorganisms, right. The vast majority of them are actually quite good. It's the bad apples in the bunch that get all the attention. So more people have died worldwide of influenza in the 1918 pandemic. And what does pandemic mean? It went worldwide, right? That's the greatest fear when we have outbreaks or epidemics, right, in particular areas, is the potential of spreading worldwide, right, and affecting the entire world's population, which in fact happened with that influenza outbreak. It's estimated that I think something like a tenth of the world's population died during that outbreak. It was pretty serious. The good news is nowadays modern sanitation helps a lot with infectious disease, right, and the spread of it. Just being clean, right? Vaccination has significantly reduced and even eliminated some of the worst diseases. Effective antimicrobial treatments, right? When someone gets sick, actually being able to help treat them and not just rely on their immune system to save their butt. What's referred to as the modern day plague? Something that's worldwide that we can't, very little we can do about it. We're improving as we go. The common cold, that's common. Doesn't really kill you. HIV. HIV is the big one. And the one with that is HIV too also doesn't necessarily kill you, but it debilitates your immune system potentially to the level that other diseases will kill you. Do you guys want to know the most common killer of someone whose HIV infection has progressed to the status that we refer to as AIDS, which is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, because at one time they didn't know what was making all these people immunodeficient. So your immune system is deficient. What other infection, typically secondary infection, gets you? Pneumonia. Pneumonia is the #1 killer of people who have progressed so far in their HIV status, right, that their immune system is deficient, what we call AIDS. So this is an example of a question from the Connect assignments from the past. And unfortunately kind of gives you an example of, and I'll tell you, I picked the questions for you guys this morning for this lecture. They haven't gotten any better. The good news is my questions are better than this. But if you can answer the hard questions in my lecture and in Connect, then you're going to rock my test, right? If you truly understand the material and you're not cheating, looking at your notes while you're, right, doing these assignments. Not necessarily cheating, but you're cheating yourself, right? So when we have a statement like this, it says, all the following are true with regard to bacteria except. Your best way to approach this type of question is to take each one of these as an individual true and false question. And what are we searching for right now? Which statement that is false? Everyone understand that? Right? I hate when they write them like this. I typically do not write my questions like this. Okay, so let's do that. So the first statement, some bacteria are able to use nitrogen gas in the atmosphere and convert it into a form that can be used by plants and animals. True or false? True. Some bacteria can break down materials that no other living organisms can degrade. True. True, right? Okay. Things like oil. I don't know about you guys. I can't eat oil. But they can. Okay. Bacteria can be used to produce useful products that are of commercial value. True, right? Good old alcohol, vitamins, right? That's what we're talking about there. The majority of bacteria are pathogenic and will cause disease if humans are exposed to them. False. And sometimes just one word will make a statement false. What's the one distractor here? Majority. Because it's not the majority, right? It is in fact the minority that makes us sick. Okay, so that's the answer, right? That's the one we keyed on. So by default, the last one's true, but let's go over it. Some bacteria can be genetically engineered to make medically important products such as insulin and growth hormone. This is true, right? And it's, more and more, they used to take, I think, from horses or pigs insulin. And the problem with that is it's a protein. And some people, their immune system recognizes a foreign protein because it's slightly different from human insulin. And so their body would attack it. And that's really bad for diabetics, right? Because they rely on the insulin because their body does not produce it. So we've been able to take that information and put it into bacteria, and they make insulin that looks exactly like human insulin, right? Much faster and cheaper and much better. But we didn't stop there, right? Scientists have tweaked even that structure, right, so that it's still functional in the body, it's still recognized by the body, but it is more stable at warmer temperatures. Because the problem with insulin for diabetics is they'd have to keep it refrigerated. They have a type now that doesn't have to be refrigerated. They're hoping, too, to get to the level where you could maybe potentially inhale it. Why can't you take a pill? Anyone know? Why can't you just take a pill of insulin with your food?
It has to be absorbed through your body.
The problem is it's a protein, right? So if you ingest a protein, what does your stomach do? It digests it as if it's a protein, right? And it doesn't get into your bloodstream in the whole protein form that it needs to be to work as the hormone insulin. Yeah, no one's taking a pill that's for diabetes that's insulin. They have a different type of diabetes, probably type 2 diabetes, where the problem isn't necessarily an insulin thing. There are other things that affect your sugar levels, how your body processes glycogen, the storage form of glucose, by your liver. So those are things that are affecting that end of the process. So, good question. All right, so moving on. So, there are some explanations that we have as to why certain emerging diseases are appearing in industrialized countries. So, why are we seeing this reemergence, right, of some things that we thought were gone? And what does emerging disease mean? It means that its incidence, right, the number of cases that we see of it have increased for a specific time period for a specific population. And so if it's within the past 20 years, it's referred to as an emerging disease. Right? So in the past 20 years, ones that we've had increases in, where in the past, right, we really didn't see this large of a number of cases of these diseases. So some of them may be old and some of them may be new. But the problem is we're seeing a lot of it. And I think it's just wonderful that the first one on my list happens to be the one that's in the news right now. Right? Good old Legionnaires Disease. Where are they having a problem? Who's been paying attention to the news? Oh, y'all are killing me.
Is that in, like, Clear Lake?
Yeah, but where in the United States do they have an outbreak they're dealing with right now? No. It's in New York, in Brooklyn. Brooklyn, New York. Right? And the problem is that, yes, it gets into the water supply. And the problem with this one is you've got to inhale it. The reason why it's called Legionnaires' disease is because during a meeting of the Legionnaires, a whole bunch of them got infected. And it was because the air conditioning system was contaminated with it, and the cooling tower associated with the air conditioning system. And so the water was in the air, right? And the people inhaled it. Does that make sense? It can cause a type of infection in the lungs, like a pneumonia. Yes, yes, yeah. And so it can be quite serious. And the problem with this one too is back when they first were having people that were sick, they had trouble identifying it because they had trouble growing the bacteria in artificial culture and identifying it. It has to be grown under special conditions. And so there was a question too at one time, are we really seeing an increase in the incidence of this, or were we just getting better at detecting it? And really only time was going to tell. But especially like with the outbreak we got going on right now in New York, they've been able to test, right? We know where it's coming from, where it's potentially come from, and they're able to test for it and clean up these areas, these reservoirs, these sites of contamination for individuals. It's pretty scary stuff, though. Right? Toxic shock syndrome. Most women are aware of this, right? Because if you use tampons, every single, by law, box of tampons that you purchase must have a pamphlet in it that explains the potential hazard of toxic shock syndrome. There are certain types of bacteria like Staphylococcus aureus, which I said is prominent in the environment. You really can't get away from it. Can grow in the tampon, and all the tampon is a cotton plug, right? That women put in their vagina to soak up the menstrual flow instead of having it flow out of the body. The problem is that that's up inside your body. And it is a source of food and environment in which a microorganism can grow. That organism can produce toxins. Since that tampon is in contact with the body, those toxins could spread through the body, right, and cause you to go into shock, right? So most women nowadays know not to wear them to bed, right? And not to wear them for long periods of time, because the longer you wear it, the more chance that a bacteria can take up residency, grow, and your face is killing me. Women's health issues. Guys are like, man, are we so glad we don't have to deal with that. And you are. But don't tune me out either, and it's okay that you're in shock, because you might be a single dad someday of a little girl, and you might have to help her out with this. So, if you can't handle it, just make sure she reads the pamphlet of what not to do, right? So, when we were first using it, we didn't understand, right? And so there was major problems with this. Most women, right, we're taught all our nice women health things from our moms or our sisters or our best friends in some cases, right? The proper use of these modern things that can create serious problems if it's not used properly. So, I don't think I have anything else to say on that one. Are we good? Right? All right. So, Lyme disease. Does anybody know what Lyme disease is? Yes, it is a bacterial infection transmitted by ticks. Do we have ticks here in Louisiana? Oh boy, do we. Right? Okay. The good news is that they're not probably carrying this bacteria. And this bacteria they would pick up from the wild animal populations they typically feed on, which the most common is deer, but also mice and different rodents. This is a serious problem in the Northeast again, because the reason why it's called Lyme disease because it was discovered in Lyme, Connecticut, which is in the Northeast, for those guys aren't aware of where that state is. Okay, so it's a problem there, but it's also have spread to other areas. Why is that? Huh? Yeah, not really the humans, right? Because remember, it's the wild animals, right? And the ticks. But humans take over what? Habitat of wild animals. And then the wild animals move. When the wild animals move, they take all their stuff with them, their bacteria and their ticks, right? And so, the Northeast is highly populated in certain areas, right? And so the animals have had to move. And this is why nature preserves and preserves for animals are very important, and they actually help our health, right? By having and giving them a place to live, right? So they're not coming into our areas and exposing us. So Lyme disease is so bad in the Northeast that my family and where I'm originally from in New England vaccinate their companion animals against Lyme disease as well. So that they don't get the infection either. To help protect them from it. So the bad news too is we ship stuff everywhere, and I was told one time by a student of a case, and I actually found it on the CDC's website, of a case in Louisiana where someone got it from a Christmas tree that had a tick on it. Right? So the Christmas tree that came from Vermont, right, had a tick on it that bit the person and gave them Lyme disease because it was carrying the bacteria. So the other thing is how to properly remove a tick, right? Because ticks do carry other diseases. Here in Louisiana, you don't necessarily have to worry about Lyme disease, right? But they could be carrying other diseases, so you want to properly remove them. You do not want to remove them in a manner in which they're going to leave their parts in you. They actually stick parts in you to be able to suck your blood. The most effective way is a pair of tweezers. Grab as close as you can to where they're in you and gently tug until they let go and pull them out. If you kill them, they will spit all their stuff into you, right? And if you just pull them off, part of their parts that they've got stuck in your skin will get stuck there, right? And could be a source of infection, right? So all those other ways you've learned are all wrong. Do not do them, right? Also, if you're concerned, once you get the tick, stick it in a Ziploc baggie, stick it in your freezer. Because if it's carrying a particular disease, like if you get a particular rash or an infection, you could bring the tick with you to the doctor and it could be sent off to the lab to be tested. Right. So keep the little bugger for a little while. Alright, so hantavirus. This is the scary day, right? Every day's a scary day. You took human pathogens. Okay, so hantavirus, clearly a virus, right? Pulmonary syndrome clearly affects your what? Lungs, right? This one, again, not prominent in this part of the United States, in Louisiana. More prominent in arid regions It's another one that's transmitted by a good old little biting thing, in this case, flea. And even the flea's poop is infectious. And what rodent is usually infested with fleas? Yeah, that's not a rodent, though. Mice, rats, things such as that. So warehouses and such, you know, try and guard against these types of things. You don't want mice, right, and rats running around and peeing on the top of your cans, all right, or their little fleas. So where do you get your canned goods from? Could be anywhere in the United States from any warehouse, right? So what should you always do to the top of your can, even if it doesn't appear to be dusty, before opening it if you do not plan on cooking the contents of that can? Clean it, right? Because these microscopic viruses could be present. When you're opening that can, you're introducing them into your food, right? And if you're not going to cook it, you're not going to be able to destroy the stuff that's present. Okay. Last one. Severe acute respiratory syndrome known as SARS. Now this was prevalent where in the world, not in the United States? China, right? They had a major outbreak. And the fear was that was going to spread, right? I'm not even going to get through this whole one today. That's okay. All right. So what factors are associated, and then we're going to wrap up. So expanding of urban areas into rural areas brings people in closer contact with animals and microbes. So what disease are we more exposed to because of this? Lyme disease, right? Changes occurring in the infectious agents that allow them to infect new hosts. So what has changed that can infect new people, and it wasn't on our list, was HIV, right? And so again, bacteria, viruses, and stuff change, and so sometimes we see these changes in incidences because of that change in the organism. Increased travel to different continents. Definitely, right, really made us afraid of SARS, right, that it could come to where we are. Increased number of unvaccinated and therefore susceptible children and adults. This wasn't one that was on our list, but was recently in the news. Good old Disneyland. Measles, measles, measles. And whooping cough, right, also known as pertussis, has been a problem. And then, of course, I forgot about hantavirus. For as far as, you know, us coming in contact with animals, right? That's one that puts you at greater risk. Not so much here in Louisiana, but in other parts of the country, right? And that contact with those wild animals can be a real problem. So we'll continue on this one on Friday.